London or Paris? I'm putting you on a spot right now.
So, in Paris, I feel like I am on holiday. Like, I feel like life is a holiday because every day it's like, magical Paris. But in London, it's like, okay, I work here. It's like,
and you're from London, right?
From Kent. But I've always worked in London. And another big thing. So throughout my whole life, I've always been that person that wants to stay close to home. Not too many changes because that'll throw things off. I like to do things that, okay, I know exactly where I am. I know exactly what I'm doing. So me coming to Paris is like a big change.
A big deal.
Even going to uni for me was like, I don't want to move out. And it was like a whole big... Okay.
Do you come from a big family?
I have 2 younger sisters, a lot of cousins, like all together as a family, probably 30 of us.
So you're used to that cozy, being at home.
Being together. Oh, yeah, I'm never on my own.
And now you are in Paris?
Yeah.
Enchanté, mademoiselle.
Enchanté. That's the limit of my French at the moment.
You're speaking French lessons.
I'm starting next week. And it's been 4 months and I feel like I feel ashamed because everyone takes the effort to speak English. And I feel like if you come to a country, you should.
I think you're being harsh on yourself. So on that bombshell, welcome to the podcast, Karisma. How are you?
I'm good. And thanks for coming all the way to Paris.
Well, there is going to be a whole series of Lazo's podcast abroad, and this is the first one. And we're in Paris today. I'm a very talented architect. You are a global architectural project manager at Louis Vuitton.
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you think you heard that wrong, you didn't. She is a project manager at Louis Vuitton.
Global architecture project manager.
There you go. Now that is a big deal. And we will get into your life in Louis Vuitton and how you got into this job eventually. But let's start with you from the beginning. When did Karisma know she wanted to be an architect?
That's a big question.
That is a big question. But let's talk about your journey.
Okay.
Because you've ended up somewhere most architects don't even think is a destination.
This is always like the tough bit
it is.
To start. But okay,
you are one of many guests that have struggled that far.
Yeah. I guess like when you're younger, you have to start deciding what you want to do for the rest of your life, and you're not qualified to make those decisions at the age of like 16, 18. It's like, what's informing those decisions? There's so many things. So I think around the age of 16 when it was like, okay, at school they started talking about career paths. So it was like, there's many like academic career paths you can go down, and I come from quite an academic background, and it was always like you need to go into a profession that's like a respected profession. So
one of the big ones, law, doctors, architects.
And I knew I never wanted to go into medicine because it was just my parents were in the medical field and they kind of said, don't do that. There's more things that you can do. So it was always about find something that you'll enjoy doing because you will do that for the rest of your life. But that's hard to make that decision at the age of 16.
100%.
Or like when you're choosing your A-levels, I guess that's when you start thinking about it. So initially, I knew I wanted to do something creative because I always enjoyed art, and I think that's how everyone gets into architecture. But I was always also very strong in maths, and I felt like I didn't want to just do something creative and like leave my technical knowledge behind. And I then, through my dad, he knew an architect because he's a dentist. So he knew a couple of architects that then he was like, okay, there's this interesting career profession. I don't know too much about it, but I do have a patient who's an architect. Maybe you can shadow them. So I went for a day and I felt like, okay, this is an interesting profession, but I don't like this day to day. It was like going in, like I went into a very small practice where it was like one man and maybe 2 other people. And it was a very small office, really dark. And people were just behind the screen, quietly working. And I was like, the type of work is really, really interesting. And it's like, okay, you can turn what you're thinking into a reality. Like you can actually build what you have in your mind. And that for me is like incredible. a lot of people have thoughts and it doesn't come into fruition because actually you don't know how to create it. But we have that power and the tools, the learning to actually make it a reality, and to walk past a building and be like, yeah, that came from me. Like, my thought was part of that process, and now we've been able to build it.
And it's the perfect balance of creativity and a sense of realism, whereas art can be very abstract. Architecture can be both, but in a way that is sustainable for a building for 100 years.
Yes. And how cool is that you can be like, there's a physical imprint.
Your work.
Yeah.
Generations of people will see.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in Paris and there are so many old classical buildings.
Yeah.
And you just walk down the streets and you're seeing this beautiful architecture. It's kind of brilliant.
Stands the test of time. But then you also have to think, okay, there's a life cycle to a building. I'm probably going off on a tangent a bit, but there is a life cycle to a building, and like, I don't know, maybe it's up for now with modern construction methods and lifespan of materials and things like that. It might only last 50 years, for example. And then in that case, what happens when your building is going to be demolished? Is it going to be demolished? Like, what's going to be?
There could be laws against it.
Or is it going to last forever? Like you said in Paris, it's like you're walking down these streets and they've been there for hundreds of years. So,
which is the beauty of architecture, the continuity in architecture.
Yeah.
And they started doing that with other projects as well, like Manchester, where I'm from, turning mills into apartments and finding a way to reuse old stuff. I think with Paris or central Paris, the reason you have a bit less of that is because these buildings are like antiquity.
Yeah.
They're like untouchable. This is, architecturally speaking, maybe the golden era of Paris. And Paris has a tradition of taking care of its old structures, even the Eiffel Tower, which has been there for well over 100 years now.
Yeah.
But let's go back onto you. So you were kind of unsure about architecture when you first shadowed this architect, but then you went into architecture school and you loved it. And then fast forward a bit, you're working at Foster's and Partners.
Yes.
That is a big deal.
Yeah. I got the, so straight after finishing uni, I think it was a week before my graduation, I had an interview at Foster's. Let me backtrack of how I got to Foster's. So when I was at uni in third year, they took us to 3 different sized practices: large scale, medium scale, and small scale. And one of those visits was Foster's.
That was the large one.
That was the large one. And out of all of them, I went there and I was like, wow, this is like the scale of it. This is like the company that builds incredible projects. It's
arguably biggest firm in the world, right? I mean, an argument could be made. They've done the Gherkin.
I know, biggest Apple. British company.
Yeah.
But like when I went into their main offices, it was like, wow, this is like, I can imagine myself here. But at the same time, it felt unreachable at the time, because it was like, it's only a certain category of people that work here, or like, you need to know someone to get in, or it felt like, do I need to do to get there? But I just applied. So I applied, and
they look people. It's easier than you think.
Yeah, I just applied, and they got back to me really, really quickly. I went for an interview, and I had the job secured the day before my graduation.
Amazing.
And then I was starting a month later. So that for me, there was no break. It was like uni, job, done. And I know for me, like, it's not as quick for everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was just lucky, but it was a lot of hard work that I applied to a lot of places, and ended up at the top.
One thing I would say about luck is the harder you work, the luckier you become.
I agree.
You know?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to take a shot in the dark. We have never had a conversation outside of today. Yeah. And here we are recording the podcast, because sometimes you just got to ask. And I reached out to you and said, I love the work that you do. Would you like to come on the podcast? And here we are. Yeah. So the harder you work, the luckier you become.
I agree.
So life at Foster's, because it wouldn't have been easy. Does it feel like at Foster's you are a fish in a big pond?
No.
No?
Again, I feel like I am a bit of an anomaly when it comes to my experience, and this is from my own experience. But a funny story is that before I started there, we had a family holiday to Barbados. And at the time, I was like just out swimming in the sea, as you do. And then there was a guy who was there, who was like there with his kids, and then he just started speaking to me and my family, and they were asking what we're doing and things like that. And then I said I was starting at Foster & Partners as a job, like, in the next few weeks. And he was like, oh, wow. Like, you know, when someone else gives you that, like, they're impressed kind of thing.
Yes.
It was
yes.
it was a nice feeling.
Was this person an architect, or was he just familiar with your field?
Just somewhat. He may have been like in banking or something like that. He knew about architecture. A lot of people I find within the world now is different to 10 years ago when I started. But back then, not many people knew of architects. There was certain groups of people, usually in the higher social circles, that work with architects, as in on a personal level. But otherwise, architecture wasn't really a known career path back when I started. It's different now.
Not like telling someone you're a doctor. Everyone knows you're a doctor. You know?
No. So it's fairly, like, for me, it was a fairly new thing. I didn't know any other architects either. Anyway, I've sidetracked.
No, you're talking about, you met someone at Barbados?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so he said, I know people who work there. It's tough. Like, there's a lot of long hours. And I hadn't had those expectations beforehand. It was like, oh no, I've just got into this huge company and it's going to, like, open
Eat you alive.
Open my life up. And then that started to scare me. And it was like, oh, what have I got myself into? And I was like, now the real work's going to start. And it did. And it was tough, but I enjoyed the type of work that I was doing so much that for me, it was like, I'm in a place where I'm learning from the best. And it was just incredible.
I like that. So you took it head on and you weren't intimidated. There must have been long hours though, of course, because you are such a big firm. But as we were discussing on our way here, you've never felt like you've had to work a day in your life. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's kind of true. Do you see what I'm getting at? You've always been very happy about being an architect.
Yes. Even through uni.
Through uni?
Yeah.
And uni is very stressful for most of us architects. Like, I can personally say, and I'm not saying this to take chops, but generally speaking, when you consider the hours you put in, the lack of sleep, the lack of a social circle outside of the people in your course, architecture can be a bit bad for your mental health.
I agree.